Welcome back, everyone, after our little mini break. So, today it is my pleasure to introduce our next session. So, we have Margie Pembroke and Maureen. I'm going to try this. Bezanson, is that right? Did I get there? Kind of? I'll go with a kind of. I can work with a kind
I'll
of.
accept it.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
No, it's not.
Excellent. Well, everyone, thank you very much for our presenters coming today, and they'll be presenting their session on seasoning Esploro to our taste, capturing scholarship of learning and teaching, and in brackets, SoLT. A little intro for our presenters. Margie is the team leader, Library Systems and Copyright Office, with the time at the university, positioning her as a project leader for the implementation of ALMA in 2017 and then Esploro in 2020. Maureen is a librarian also at Southern Cross University's Library Systems team and was integral to the rollout of Esploro, and to quote Maureen's own words, prides herself on having just enough technical knowledge to break things. I'll now mute, switch off my camera and invite our presenters to take over. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. So I am Maureen Bezanson, but I'll take Bezanson, as my boss likes to call me, or Bezanson, or whatever it comes out as. And I'm from Southern Cross University Library Systems team. Margie Pembroke is here beside me, but I'm gonna slide her out of the way, and she may slide back over for questions when we open for questions later. I'm presenting today, and she's gonna present this at Igloo later this year. Okay, Jingawala. We are joining you today from Lismore in northern New South Wales, which is on Bundjalung land of the Widjabul people. Southern Cross University also has campuses on the Yugambeh Nation and the Gumbaynggirr Nation. We pay our respects to the traditional owners of these lands and to all Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander, and other First Nations peoples present. We'll jump right in today with a bit about Southern Cross University, background for you about what scholarship of learning and teaching means, and we'll walk through how we've customized Ex Libris's Esploro product to help collect and report on the SoLT done at Southern Cross University. So, Southern Cross University has three main East Coast campuses: Gold Coast in Southeast Queensland, which is adjacent to the Gold Coast Airport; Northern Rivers, set among 75 hectares of lush natural beauty in Lismore, northern New South Wales; and Coffs Harbour on the northern New South Wales coast, which is also the location of our renowned National Marine Science Centre. We have several branch campuses, including our Coomera Creative Campus on the northern Gold Coast, and that operates as an educational partnership with TAFE Queensland. Metro campuses in Sydney, Melbourne, and Perth, and the Hotel School, which is in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and Hayman Island, which we operate in partnership with MULFA Australia. Outstanding research lies at the core of Southern Cross University's work. Some research innovations from SCU include trialing a marine cloud brightening technology to prevent coral bleaching, working to address the varroa mite incursion on bee health and production, and new and exciting research in health, such as the largest ever clinical trial of botanical cannabinoidal for sleep disturbances. We have achieved well above world standard in 14 research fields in the latest Excellence in Research Australia exercise, and at world standard in a further 23. We don't just save our success for research, though. The university has introduced an innovative new teaching paradigm, the Southern Cross model, that teaches an immersive learning experience through a shorter, more focused 6-week unit structure. Evidence of our success includes our recent jump in the Times Higher Education Young Universities ranking to take our place in the top 100. For a young regional university, we punch above our weight as far as research and teaching goes. Just to give you an idea of what our campuses look like, here's the Coffs Harbour campus, the Northern Rivers campus with the library in the bottom right-hand corner, and the Gold Coast campus with the waves of Kira Beach in the background. Not a bad place to work. To understand what we've done and why we did it, we need to start with a background of the Australian education sector and requirements. The Tertiary Education Quality Standards Agency, or TEQSA, is Australia's independent quality assurance and regulatory agency for higher education. And they're responsible for developing the Higher Education Standards Framework, a National Code of Practice, Australian Qualifications Framework, and enacting the TEXA Act and the Education Services for Overseas Students, or ESOS Act. So in short, they're the regulatory body responsible for ensuring that Australian higher education institutes meet the required standards. And this includes registration of Australian universities through TEXA, and Southern Cross University is due for re-registration in 2025. So one of the reportable measures that they use is engagement of the institution's teaching staff with scholarship of learning and teaching. In the context of higher education standards framework, scholarship refers to activities concerning the gaining new or improved understanding or appreciation and insights into a field of knowledge, or engaging with and keeping up to date with advances in the field. SCU has policies to support SoLT, and that's the Academic Quality, Standards, and Integrity Policy and the Academic Promotions Policy. This means that academic staff are required to capture and report on their SoLT activities in an effort to ensure university-wide compliance with Texas requirements. So all of this led to our Academic Portfolio Office at SCU to identify the need for a tool to capture, collate, and report on SoLT activities. Our director, Claire Thorpe, is a member of the Teaching and Assessment Committee, and that was working on developing a method to provide the evidence of SoLT activity to TEXA. Claire identified that Esploro was already capturing much of this information, and in her words, she said, "I see this as a great opportunity to engage with the Center for Teaching and Learning and enhance engagement with Esploro." We'll show you how we did that later. For now, I'm going to explain a little bit about exactly what SoLT is. In essence, at Southern Cross University, the ultimate goal is to improve the outcomes and experiences for students. All scholarly activities are undertaken with an evidence-based approach. SoLT is not ad hoc, but it's planned and reflected on. And the sharing of this evidence is where the library started to get involved. There's a social element to SoLT. What we do must be shared to contribute to the discourse about what good teaching and learning looks like. This evidence might be seen in the teaching and learning practices themselves, the research outputs, and the scholarly engagement done by our academics. At this point, I do want to mention why SCU uses the acronym SoLT instead of the more common SOTL that's used in the industry. There were early conversations at SCU, and it was decided that we'd put the L before the T because learning is at the center of what we do. Learning is what we're aiming for, and our teaching is at the service of learning. The vision is evidence is put into teaching practice to improve student outcomes. And each step along this way is shared to feed back into the evidence of scholarship in the broader higher education sector. Making SoLT public may be local within an institution and unit design team, or more broadly through conferences or scholarly publications. And sharing this SoLT and making it public is how the library got involved. As Esploro was well established as SCU's institutional repository platform for collecting and facilitating access to the university's research outputs, our director identified it already held many of the publication outputs, such as conference presentations, theses, and journal articles that could be defined as SoLT. We'd need to figure out how to flag them, but they were there. The library systems team looked at the SoLT definitions and identified the capacity to configure Esploro activities, which was functionality we were not yet using. To capture not just the publications, grants, and media mentions, but to capture all SoLT outputs and activities in Esploro. We were asked for an apple, but we made a fruit salad very quickly. So we had our apples, let's call them, the research outputs related to SoLT. But could we configure Esploro as a location for academics to also record their engagement with new teaching methods, their teaching and learning awards, their editorial input into scholarly teaching and learning publications? In short, yes, we could and did. Library staff partnered with our colleagues in the Centre for Teaching and Learning and the Academic Portfolio Office to identify the business requirements and modify Esploro's configuration, reports, and public interface. To give you an idea of this complexity, I'm going to give you an outline of the mapping process. Each of the 3 high-level SoLT categories was mapped to different entities in Esploro. Learning and teaching impact and practice was easy, mapping only to the activities entity. However, something that fits the scholarly collaboration and activity SoLT category could be recorded in outputs as a research asset, thesis, grant, or it could be an activity. Likewise, engagement and contribution to communities could be mapped to several different entity types. In some cases, there could be multiple entities for the same SoLT. For example, if an academic was presenting at a conference about a particular activity, they might also be writing a journal article about it. The team then looked at specific types and definitions of SoLT and mapped them directly to each of the entity types. We decided against using projects for now, but it may be an option in the future. The word salad on the next slide will give you an idea of all of the types of SoLT we needed to map. As you can see, we were given a lot of examples of SoLT items to map, and each of these needed to be mapped to an entity in Esploro that we could then flag as SoLT. So it was a huge effort on its own, finding what entity type best matched for reporting the SoLT and displaying them on the academic's profile. We then had to take our word salad and go back to the overarching 3 pillars of SoLT within the different entity types. We needed to be able to differentiate what type of SoLT we were looking at. And if that wasn't enough, the examples provided by our stakeholders broke down the 3 pillars further. So the dark blue, scholarly collaboration and activity. We had the subtypes of scholarly reviews, original SoLT research and scholarly activity, scholarly teaching practice, and higher level qualifications. And within the mid blue, we had, so the engagement and contribution to communities, there were the subtypes of synthesizing and communicating advances in evidence-based practice, contributions to relevant professional bodies or communities or practice, and active and ongoing involvement in relevant scholarly academic societies, editorial roles, or peer review. And for the light blue, learning and teaching practice and impact, it was broken down to teaching practice, engaging the latest ideas, debates, and issues, undertaking advanced specialized practice or scholarly secondments, and fellowship and national awards. So each of these outputs, grants, media, and activities articulated in the word salad on screen, we needed to be able to enter them, identify them, and tag them accordingly into Esploro. Which brings us back to looking at the system configuration. One thing that quickly became evident as we were looking to configure our Esploro instance research portal for SoLT was it wasn't just about research anymore. We were no longer just talking with researchers. We were working with all academics. And Research Portal wasn't just an institutional repository, it was so much more. Esploro was rebranded CrossConnect and is now our platform to showcase our academic experts, research and scholarly publications, projects and activities. We support all types of intellectual, creative, and cultural outputs, including open access to our research and scholarship of learning and teaching activities where available. In our configuration, we grabbed the low-hanging fruit first, that being the outputs that had already been added to Esploro, such as conference presentations, journal articles, conference proceedings, and theses. For these, we configured an additional field that was also added to the facets on the portal. The university conducts a symposium of scholarship of learning and teaching each year, and these presentations were updated using export-import CSV. Academics are encouraged to use the messaging feature via their profile to advise CrossConnect staff to add the tag to the assets that are not flagged, and they can check their outputs via the SoLT tag in the local fields of the full record. For our grants, we added scholarship of learning and teaching as a grant category type. And likewise, media mentions, we added the media mention type. It's important to note that neither grants nor media mentions are self-submitted, and the academic must email us to ensure they can be captured in the reporting. But most of our SoLT entities are activities. And we worked extensively with the Center for Teaching and Learning and Academic Portfolio Office to define, refine, and explain what academics needed to do. This information was then published to the website in the form of a knowledge base article. One of the challenges was the wordiness of some of the SoLT definitions. Some of them were an entire sentence, and we had to synthesize this down into something that made sense and would also look good on the portal. In the end, we were able to customize the activities entity to accommodate all the SoLT types that were not covered by other Esploro entities. There were, however, limitations, such as the inability to hide, rename, or reorder the highest level of activity categories. So we ended up deciding to put all of the SoLT activities under the teaching category, but we needed to train our academics to scroll down to teaching category before starting to enter anything. Even then, the only mandatory field when entering an activity is the activity title and the category. We needed to report on things like dates, and it's not intuitive that you have to go back in and edit the activity to enter a date. Our stakeholders were also keen to be able to report on course information, but again, no way to make the fields mandatory. Plus, we'd added a variety of SoLT attributes to capture more granularity about the activity. When an academic adds an activity, it displays on the public profile as soon as it's submitted. So it's imperative to capture as much information as we can at the time an academic is creating the activity. Might sound like a lot of negative, but there was a great deal of positive. We were able to utilize new functionality that enabled 3 activity tabs to display and label one of them the Scholarship, Learning, and Teaching. This created a great visible queue for anyone adding SoLT to their profile. Since we've enabled this Scholarship, Learning, and Teaching tab, we've seen increased requests from academics wanting to know how to have this display on their profile. Short answer is easy, just add a teaching category. However, remember that word salad and complicated mapping of SoLT to Esploro entities? Well, we needed to provide resources to help academics figure out whether they were looking at an apple or a strawberry and teach them how to report the applicable entity to CrossConnect platform. You saw how complex the mapping of the activity types was. The next level was making sure that all of our mapping made sense to academics. We needed to make sure that whatever fields we used were available in analytics, and any fields that displayed in the portal translated to the screen in a sensible way. It was a lot of trial and error. To give you an idea, this is a screenshot of the knowledge-based article our Center for Teaching and Learning provided. And if I was feeling braver, I'd follow the links so I could scroll down and show you the complexity. But the important column in this is how to enter on your SU profile on CrossConnect. If we follow that link, it takes us to self-help pages on our library website, where we provided step-by-step instructions for each of these items, as well as how-to videos at the bottom of the page. And we've offered several training sessions for our academics, including one tomorrow. Exlibris Analytics gives incredible flexibility for reporting options available to us. What we need to work out as part of this project is exactly what was required by different stakeholders so that we could create reports and dashboards that would best suit their needs. Key element we haven't discussed thus far is quality control for the recording of SoLT. So CrossConnect is our institutional repository, and we have very clear processes to ensure quality metadata is attached to our research outputs. Let's face it, metadata is kind of important to a lot of us in library land. However, when we embarked on this project, we were clear right from the start that library staff could not and should not be the judge of what should be considered eligible to report as SoLT. In the end, we've pushed the responsibility for identifying outputs, grants, and media mentions back to the academics. They need to notify the CrossConnect team when something is SoLT eligible. And academics are also responsible for entering their SoLT activities, but we've configured reporting with an approval step. Esploro does not have an approval workflow for activities like they have for outputs. So we've configured our activities to automatically be live on profiles, but not the portal. And we use the portal visibility flag in our reporting. On a quarterly basis, we send a list of the activities entered to the relevant Associate Dean of Education, the ADE, or Head of Work Unit for approval. Only after we hear back from them with approval will the portal visibility flag be updated, and then the activity will display on our other levels of reporting. If you remember earlier, I mentioned a concern about specific fields not being required. We also use this Associate Deans of Education dashboard to flag activities that have no date entered. And then it's the responsibility of the academic dean education to let the academic know, put a date in or it's not going to show up on our reporting. So our plan is academics will be able to use the CV export functionality to export their SoLT activities from their profile, use that as academic promotion evidence and performance reviews. Quarterly dashboard for the ADEs will be used to get activity approval, as well as provide them with an FYI of the other entities that have been entered. Still not quite sure exactly what format the faculty management and board want for reporting, but we're open to developing a dashboard and analytics, or they may choose to ingest and combine with other data on Power BI dashboards. This level of reporting is definitely still a work in process, but we have the data. Now, along this journey, we've been refining our implementation in an iterative way. As there was not previously a formal process for recording and reporting SoLT, the requirements continue to be refined. Updating requirements meant we may need to modify the labels being used in Esploro, the reports we're producing, or the information we provided to academics about how to report their SoLT. We suspect this will be an ongoing process as across the university and sector-wide, requirements for SoLT continue to refine. While I've mentioned some of the challenges, it's worth pulling them all into one place. We've struggled with the wordiness of the SoLT definitions. For example, in the stream engagement and contribution to communities, there was active and ongoing involvement in relevant scholarly academic societies, editorial roles, or peer review. This needed to be short, firstly to fit within the field, and secondly to look okay on the portal. So it became engagement and contribution to communities, scholarly academic societies. Still a bit long. We also struggled with the vagueness and overlap with some things such as scholarly reviews. And here we had to push back to the information on the knowledge base article. We were working with two different organizational unit stakeholders, both with slightly different requirements and conflicting needs. The complexity of the reporting reflects this, as from an academic's perspective, the reporting of SoLT can contribute to promotion. But at TEXA level reporting, who has done what is not as important as how much has been done. Qualitative versus quantitative requirement. We needed to be able to support both needs and provide an approval process. As I said, we're still defining exactly what reporting requirements are for TEXA or AXWA, but at least we've gathered the data and analytics has the capacity to report on it in various ways. Our systems challenges included the lack of flexibility at the top level to change the label or hide an activity category, and the inability to make it field mandatory, as we touched on earlier. Training challenges included the lack of translation of terminology between SoLT and Esploro. While activities are an entity in Esploro, SoLT activities might include publications, theses, conferences, presentations, and all the other stuff that we put into the activity entity. We also took a gamble that we'd be able to build the reports required, as reports can only be built and tested with live data. So we were unable to test this in our sandbox environment. Speaking of the sandbox, the initial proof of concept that we ran up on the sandbox was at very short notice in the beginning of August, a week or two before the sandbox refresh. We were able to export and re-import all the tables, but anything we'd added as an example activity needed to be re-added. And then we'd had to do it all again in February sandbox refresh, but this time we had a bit more content in live. Despite all those challenges, we've been able to provide evidence that SCU is recording our academic SoLT contributions. And we've done this virtually cost-free using our existing infrastructure. Only a little bit more SoLT added to the pepper. We're collecting the data in an open system where we will be able to export the raw data from Esploro in multiple formats if it's needed to cater to potential future reporting needs. We provided teaching academics with somewhere to record and promote their contributions they make, both inside and outside of the classroom, giving them the tangible evidence to bring to performance review conversations. Plus, as ex libris advocates, we've provided another way that Esploro is essential to our university's operations and reporting. Cross Connect is so much more than an institutional repository. Anything in the chat?
Thank you very much. Now, I know we've got Ella monitoring the chat, but I don't think we've got much in there at the moment.
No, there's no questions for you yet.
Must be a sign of how awesome it is. Look, from, I think there's, okay, that's just saying you're doing awesome. Out of interest, so the journey with how you've gone with Esploro, prior to when you had it installed, what was the kind of approach that that you and the team would have done beforehand? Was there like a lot of manual workarounds? Was it like cobbled different systems together? I'm curious to understand about how that journey has gone and how that technology has really reshaped the way that you're doing things. And does anyone pine for the old way?
I'm sorry, Sean, I missed the first part of that question because the sound is not great in this room. So are you talking about the Esploro implementation and the product in general, or the SoLT, this particular piece of work?
I guess I was probably thinking about it from the former, but I think the latter is interesting because I hadn't thought about the need to have to map according to the ways that you've done it in this particular instance as well too. So we'll probably just keep on track with that as well. You mentioned that obviously there was a lot that the team members had to go through and there's a lot of education that went in there as well. Do you have, I guess, you know, the researchers and academic staff that you work with, do you find that they come back and say, we prefer the old way, or do they, is there general universal, I guess, approval for what you've done? Because it sounds complex but fascinating. I think the reporting in particular, I think is really, really interesting as well.
It's been received really well received by the teaching staff, because if you think of the repository as a research portal, this actually then broadened its reach into teaching only and teaching scholars. So they had a method of actually proving or displaying what they were doing, rather than have that limited to publications and grants and things like that. So this is the other side of the coin of educational institutions, I suppose, particularly universities. So you're actually looking at, all right, what are we doing with our teaching? And that's, you know, at the core of what we do, as well as the research. There's those two streams. So it was actually really well received by those teaching scholars. Yeah. As far as a different way of doing things, well, this is a much more manual process than how we collect and report on our research. Not so much the reporting, but the repository is the outward facing view of what our researchers do. Much of the research stuff is automatic. You know, we use smart harvesting. Everything is brought in. Once we've actually built that profile, it's all very automated. So there was no objections at all from researchers. There's been, I haven't really heard any pushback from teaching scholars, apart from the fact, oh, great, I can actually put this stuff somewhere and have it in one place. And we're hoping to be able to actually push it onto a CV for them, generated from the system as well, so that they can use that in their promotions.
Yeah. So previously, if we compare previous systems, the teaching only academics didn't have any.
They didn't have
anything public. And yes, the research content is still being captured automatically as it was before, but now we have this plus.
Thank you very much. Ella, I think there's a few things to come through.
Yeah, there's a question from Patricia. I'd be curious to know if you spoke with other institutions who use Esploro before implementation.
Implementation of SoLT or in general? In general?
Implementation of Esploro, yeah. Patricia, can you refine
Of
that?
Esploro, yeah.
We were an early adopter of Esploro, so no, there were none.
Fair
That's
enough.
a short answer.
We've spoken to a lot since as people wanting to know about our experience with Esploro.
Yeah. And Claire, our director, has made a really great contribution to the chat here. So the head of the college was to collate SU SoLT into an EndNote library. And Esploro was a much better method of displaying that, obviously, because it's visible and it contributes to their actual academic profile as well. Yeah. No more questions?
Nope, one more just popped up.
Alison's just put in, have you made any refinements to the SoLT setup since launch based on feedback from academics?
At this point, the majority of the feedbacks come from the stakeholders that we've been working with. Other refinements that we've made from suggestions from academics. I do know one refinement that I made very quickly about the reporting. I met with one of our associate deans of education to show her what we've been planning for the reporting. And as soon as we started meeting, I realized, oh, you don't need to see this. This isn't important for you. So yes, there has been feedback along the way. Every time we discuss it with someone new, we end up tweaking things slightly. But specifically,
I think there was a bit of toing and froing with the Centre for Teaching and Learning to really refine the headings that we used, because there was no way some of them were 2 sentences long and there was no way you could actually use that as a label anywhere. So it has been a very iterative process, as Maureen said. But one of the beauties of it is it's a really flexible system and it's been quite easy to configure and provided a really neat solution to what was an institutional problem.
yeah, probably the biggest point of feedback is just that a top level category is called teaching, not teaching and learning or learning and teaching. And unfortunately, that is something that is a system limitation, not something we could change.
Yeah. Does any of Esploro config relate to data in other ex-libris systems? It's kind of funny, they're connected, but yet they're not. So you could have Esploro as a standalone product, but it does use the user fields of the user record in Alma, and those two are connected. The IDs are connected. You can export from Alma into Esploro. You can export from Esploro into Alma, either via OAI PMH or other XML systems. There's interconnection with all of your FTP configuration. So everything's in the one place as far as that side of the infrastructure goes. So it's connected and it's not, if that makes sense. So it doesn't have to be, but it can be.
It's using the same analytics.
Yeah.
So when I talk about creating dashboards or data visualizations, that's all, if you're used to working with Alma Analytics, it's exactly the same as Esploro Analytics.
Well, we're a little bit over time now, so I'd like to once again thank Margie and Maureen very much for your time today. Great questions from everyone, so thank you. The next presentation will start in about 6 minutes, so a quick tea break. And yes, once again, thank you very much and keep enjoying the day as it goes on. Thank you.